What if I told you there's a place where the walls themselves seem alive? A place where whispers crawl into your ears, even when you're standing completely alone. This isn't just a story you hear on a cold night by the fire. This is real. And tonight, I'm going to take you inside. It started the moment we stepped out of the car. Midnight. The air was cold, but not the kind of cold that makes you shiver. It was the kind that seemed to press against your skin, heavy and still. The hospital loomed in front of us like a silent giant, its broken windows gaping like empty eyes. The building stood there, almost as if it were waiting. We stood in the dim corridor, the faint smell of mildew clinging to the damp air. Before taking another step, I had to remind myself why this hospital was so infamous. It wasn't just the decay, the emptiness, or the eerie graffiti. It was the history, the story behind these crumbling walls that had drawn us here. This place, known locally as St. Vincent's Asylum, was built in 1925. It was meant to be a sanctuary, a state-of-the-art facility for the sick and dying. Back then, it was hailed as a beacon of hope. They said it had everything: a maternity ward, a surgical wing, even a psychiatric floor. But as with many places born from good intentions, something changed. The first sign of trouble came just a few years after its opening. Patients began whispering about strange occurrences. They spoke of lights flickering for no reason, of hearing muffled cries in the middle of the night, even when the ward was silent. Nurses reported seeing figures standing at the end of hallways, only to find nothing there moments later. But those were just rumors, right? At least that's what the administration told the staff. They were adamant that the hospital's reputation remained spotless. By the 1940s, the hospital's population had exploded. Overflowing wards meant patients were crammed into rooms, their beds lining the hallways. It was chaotic, and in that chaos, darker rumors began to surface. Some said the doctors here weren't just treating the sick, they were experimenting on them. There were whispers of treatments that didn't seem ethical. Electroshock therapy performed on patients who didn't consent. Surgeries conducted without proper anesthesia. There was even talk of a treatment room in the basement, where patients entered but were never seen again. In 1952, the first documented tragedy occurred. A young nurse named Elizabeth Myers went missing during her shift. Her body was found days later in one of the abandoned wings. The official report claimed she had fallen down the stairs, but the staff knew better. The way her body was positioned, the marks on her arms, it didn't add up. Elizabeth wasn't the last. Over the next few decades, there were more disappearances, patients, nurses, even a doctor. Each time, the hospital offered explanations that barely held together. But the staff and the town knew something wasn't right. By the 1970s, the stories had grown darker. Patients in the psychiatric ward began complaining about the man in the corner. They said he would watch them at night, standing perfectly still, his face hidden in the shadows. But when nurses checked, the rooms were always empty. And then there were the voices. Entire wards reported hearing whispers in languages no one could identify. Some claimed to hear their own names being called, even when no one was around. The most unsettling account came from a janitor in 1979. He swore he heard a woman sobbing in the basement. When he went to check, the sobbing stopped, but he found deep scratch marks along the walls, as if someone had been clawing to get out. By 1987, the hospital couldn't hide its dark reputation anymore. Lawsuits piled up from families who claimed their loved ones had been mistreated or worse, gone missing. But that wasn't what finally shut it down. It was the night of March 15, 1987. On that night, a power outage plunged the hospital into darkness. Nurses scrambled to assist patients, but something else happened. Patients began screaming all at once, claiming to see shadowy figures circling their beds. One nurse later described it as if the shadows had come alive. By morning, 5 patients were dead, and 2 staff members had vanished without a trace. The hospital was shut down within weeks. Officially, it was due to funding issues, but everyone in town knew the truth. Something was wrong with this place. For years, the hospital sat abandoned, its halls left to rot. But the stories never stopped. Locals claimed to see lights flickering in the windows late at night. Trespassers reported hearing voices, seeing shadowy figures darting through the halls, or feeling something cold brush against their skin. And then there were the stories of people who went inside and never came back. I had heard all of this before. As someone who's always been fascinated by the paranormal, I'd read every article, listened to every podcast, and watched every video about St. Vincent's. But nothing could prepare me for being here. Standing in that dark, crumbling hallway, I could feel it. This wasn't just an old building. It was like the walls themselves were alive, holding onto the pain and fear that had unfolded here. Every step felt heavier, as if something didn't want us to go further. Our backpacks were stuffed with flashlights, cameras, and EMF detectors. One of my friends even brought a digital recorder, hoping to capture EVP's electronic voice phenomena. As we strapped on our gear, I found myself staring up at the hospital's windows. They were dark, lifeless, except for one. I've explored haunted places before, abandoned houses, cemeteries, even an old asylum once. But this was different. I wasn't just scared. I felt like I was being watched. I took a deep breath and adjusted my flashlight. There was no turning back now. Whatever was waiting for us inside St. Vincent's, we were about to face it. Would you want to hear more about what happened next? A faint light flickered in the upper right corner, just for a second. I nudged my friend. "Did you see that?" I whispered, but when we looked again, the window was pitch black. "Probably just your imagination," someone muttered, but their voice wavered. It wasn't just the light. The stories I'd heard about this place began flooding back. People who came here claimed to see shadows moving, hear voices calling their names, even feel cold hands brushing against their skin. And then there were the ones who never came back. As we approached the main entrance, the air grew colder. My flashlight beam landed on the rusted metal doors. They were slightly ajar, creaking softly as the wind nudged them. Just as I reached out to push them open, we heard it. A faint sound, like footsteps crunching on gravel, coming from behind us. We whipped around, but no one was there. The empty parking lot stretched out before us, silent and still. "Let's just go," someone said, their voice trembling. And so, with one last glance at the darkness behind us, we stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the smell. A mix of dampness, mold, and something else I couldn't quite place. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a corridor lined with broken furniture and scattered debris. Old gurneys sat abandoned, their wheels rusted and stiff. Medical charts, yellowed with age, littered the floor. The silence was deafening. Every step we took seemed to echo, bouncing off the peeling walls. It felt as though the building itself was listening, waiting. I passed an old examination room, the door hanging off its hinges. Inside, there was a rusted metal chair with leather straps on the armrests. My stomach churned as I imagined what it must have been used for. "The hallways seem endless," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't just the darkness, it was the feeling of being watched. Every now and then, I'd glance over my shoulder, certain I'd see someone or something standing there. The stairs groaned under our weight as we climbed to the second floor. This level felt different. The air was colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer, curling into corners like they were hiding something. My flashlight swept across the walls, and that's when I saw them. Bloody handprints smeared along the peeling paint. They were faint, like they had been there for years, but the sight made my heart race. "Is that blood?" one of my friends whispered, their voice shaky. We moved further down the hall and found a pile of old patient files scattered across the floor. I picked one up and flipped through it. The notes were chilling. Descriptions of patients who claimed to see shadow people, scribbled in frantic handwriting. One entry read, "Patient number 237 keeps screaming about the man in the corner. Says he won't leave her alone. She's been restrained for her own safety." We were so engrossed in the files that we almost didn't notice it. But then someone gasped, "Do you see that?" At the far end of the hall, there were footprints. Fresh, damp footprints leading away from us, disappearing around the corner. My flashlight beam trembled as I aimed it down the hall. "Who else is here?" someone whispered, but no one answered. We hesitated at the top of the stairs leading to the basement. The air here felt heavier, colder, as if something was warning us to turn back. But curiosity won over fear, and we began our descent. The staircase was narrow and steep, the walls lined with pipes that dripped with condensation. With every step, the temperature dropped, and the faint metallic smell grew stronger. When we reached the bottom, we found ourselves in the hospital morgue. The room was freezing, and our breaths came out in faint clouds. Metal drawers lined the walls, each one labeled with a name or number. Most of them were rusted shut, but one drawer hung slightly open, revealing a yellowed sheet beneath. I stepped closer, the beam of my flashlight trembling as I reached out to touch the drawer. But before I could, a loud clang echoed behind us. We spun around, our flashlights darting across the room. The sound had come from one of the doors leading deeper into the basement. It was slightly ajar, swaying gently as if someone had just passed through. "Did you hear that?" one of my friends whispered, their voice barely audible. The air felt thick, pressing against my chest. It was hard to breathe, and I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. The whispers started then, soft, unintelligible, coming from all around us. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. The only response was a faint laugh, distant and hollow, echoing from the open door. We stood frozen in the basement morgue, our flashlights trembling as they illuminated the swaying door. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a suffocating silence that seemed to press against my ears. My heart thundered, each beat echoing in the stillness. "We should leave," someone muttered, their voice barely audible. But I couldn't move. My eyes were locked on that door. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, but a part of me had to know what was on the other side. I took a step forward, and the floor creaked beneath me, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet. The door stopped swaying, and then, as if in response to my movement, it slammed shut with a deafening bang. We all jumped, and one of my friends yelped. The sound echoed through the morgue, and for a moment, everything was chaos. My flashlight flickered, plunging us into brief moments of total darkness before it stabilized again. "What the hell was that?" someone whispered, their voice quivering. Before I could answer, the temperature in the room plummeted. I could see my breath hanging in the air, and the metallic smell grew stronger, almost suffocating. Then we heard it, a faint, raspy voice. It wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from the digital recorder one of my friends was holding. The little red light on the recorder blinked steadily as the voice repeated a single word, over and over. "Leave." It was barely a whisper, but it sent chills down my spine. The voice didn't sound human. It was distorted, guttural, like it was coming from somewhere deep within the recorder itself. "Turn it off," I said, my voice shaking. My friend fumbled with the device, but the voice grew louder. "Leave, leave, leave." The recorder suddenly sparked, the light blinking erratically, and then it went dead. The silence that followed was deafening. I turned to the others, my breath catching in my throat. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear. But before we could say anything, the lights on our equipment, our flashlights, the EMF detector, even the camera, started flickering violently. And then we saw it. At the far end of the morgue, where the light barely reached, a shadow began to take form. At first, it was faint, just a darker patch of black against the darkness. But then it grew, stretching upward until it resembled a tall, impossibly thin figure. "Do you see that?" one of my friends whispered, clutching my arm. The shadow didn't move like a person. It seemed to shift and ripple, its edges blurring as if it were made of smoke. But its eyes, or where its eyes should have been, glowed faintly, a dull red that pierced through the darkness. It stood there for a moment, unmoving, and then it began to move. The way it moved was unnatural. It didn't walk or glide. It jolted forward in sudden, jerky motions, as if it were being yanked by invisible strings. And with each jolt, it got closer. "Run," someone whispered, but my legs felt like lead. I couldn't take my eyes off the thing. The shadow stopped suddenly, just a few feet away from us. The temperature dropped even further, and the smell of metal was almost unbearable now. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as the figure leaned forward, its face, or what should have been its face, mere inches from mine. That's when the poltergeist activity began. The metal drawers in the morgue slammed open and shut violently, the sound echoing like gunshots. The gurneys rolled across the floor on their own, crashing into walls. Papers and medical charts flew into the air, circling us like a tornado of chaos. My flashlight fell from my trembling hands, and as I bent down to pick it up, I saw something written on the floor in what looked like dried blood. The words were smeared but unmistakable. "Get out." We didn't need another warning. Grabbing the flashlight, I shouted, "We need to leave now." We turned to run, but the door leading back to the stairs slammed shut before we could reach it. The sound reverberated through the room, and the shadow figure let out a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then we heard it, the loud, echoing footsteps. They were heavy, deliberate, and they were coming straight toward us from the other end of the hall. "But no one else is here," someone screamed, their voice breaking. The footsteps grew louder, faster, until it sounded like they were right behind us. My friend swung the flashlight around, but there was nothing there. And yet, the sound continued, relentless, like something unseen was chasing us. Suddenly, the lights on our equipment flickered one last time and died completely, plunging us into total darkness. And just when we thought it couldn't get worse, the door behind us creaked open, ever so slowly. Something was standing there waiting for us, and then it spoke. "Go!" I shouted, my voice barely audible over the deafening sound of footsteps pounding behind us. My heart was in my throat as we sprinted toward the stairs. The narrow beam of my flashlight danced wildly across the walls, illuminating peeling paint and cracked tiles. Every few steps, it felt like something was tugging at the back of my shirt, like invisible hands trying to pull me back. We reached the stairwell, but the door wouldn't budge. "It's locked!" one of my friends screamed, frantically jiggling the handle. "Move!" I shouted, slamming my shoulder into the door. It groaned under the force, but it wouldn't open. Behind us, the footsteps grew louder, closer, until it sounded like whoever or whatever was chasing us was just a few feet away. Then came the whispers, low, guttural murmurs that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. The words were indistinct, but the malice in them was unmistakable. Out of sheer desperation, I kicked the door with all my strength. The wood splintered, and with one final shove, it burst open. We stumbled into the stairwell, the cold air hitting us like a wall. But the nightmare wasn't over. As we ascended the stairs, the lights began to flicker violently. Shadows danced on the walls, moving in ways that didn't match our movements. It felt like the entire hospital was alive, breathing, and it didn't want us to leave. The footsteps were back, echoing up the stairwell, louder and faster now. I glanced back, and for a split second, I thought I saw a figure standing at the bottom of the stairs. It was tall and dark, its red eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "Don't look back!" someone shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me forward. We reached the top of the stairs and burst through the door, back into the first-floor hallway. The exit was just ahead, the faint glow of moonlight spilling through the glass doors. But as we ran, the hospital fought back. The floor beneath us seemed to ripple, the walls groaning as if they were alive. Doors slammed shut on either side of the hallway, and the metallic smell was so strong now that I could taste it. We reached the exit and threw ourselves against the doors. For a horrifying moment, they wouldn't open. Then, with a loud creak, they swung outward, and we stumbled into the night air. The silence outside was deafening. The oppressive atmosphere of the hospital was gone, replaced by the soft rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of crickets. We didn't stop running until we reached the car. As we slammed the doors shut and sped away, no one spoke. The only sound was our ragged breathing, the adrenaline still coursing through our veins. It wasn't until the next day, when we reviewed the footage, that we realized just how close we had come to something truly unexplainable. The first oddity was the recorder. Despite the device being completely dead after the encounter, it had somehow captured audio the entire time. As we listened, the whispers grew louder and more distinct. One phrase repeated over and over again, "You can't leave." But it was the video footage that truly chilled us to the bone. In one clip, as we stood in the morgue, the camera caught something none of us had noticed at the time, a figure standing directly behind me. It was the same tall, shadowy silhouette with glowing red eyes. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but its presence was unmistakable. And then there was the final clip. As we sprinted toward the exit, the camera, mounted on my friend's shoulder, caught a reflection in one of the glass doors. There, in the reflection, was a group of figures, dozens of them, standing in the hallway watching us leave. The strangest part? None of us remember hearing those footsteps or seeing anyone else in the building. Even now, as I recount this story, I can't shake the feeling that we brought something back with us that night. Something that didn't want us to leave, but let us go anyway, for now. If this story gives you chills, hit that like button and add your comment. It really helps us keep exploring these terrifying places. And don't forget to subscribe for more weekly dives into the world's most haunted locations. See you tomorrow.